At a lively song and dance festival, a renowned playboy noble caught sight of a stunning dancer on stage, and in that instant, he was completely spellbound. From his companions, he learned that this woman was none other than the famous daughter of the Fujiwara family, Takeko. What's more, Takeko had already been chosen as a future consort for the emperor, but instead of discouraging him, this only fueled the man's desire. From that night on, he began sending letters filled with love poems to Takeko's residence. Even the maids who served her felt envious. This man's name was Narahira. He was a renowned playboy of the time. He often used his talent in poetry to express his feelings of love. Many women admired him, but Takeko was unmoved by his pursuit. She immediately wrote him a reply of refusal, telling him not to waste his heart on her. What she didn't expect was that her firm rejection would only ignite Narahira's fighting spirit. One night, he sneaked into Takeko's mansion. Startled, Takeko cried out in fear. When she calmed down, she realized the intruder was none other than Narahira himself. Never in her wildest dreams did she expect him to trespass her private quarters at night. Fear surged through her chest. She clasped her hands together and began whispering a prayer. But when Narahira saw her reactions, he burst into laughter. He had never imagined that the cold and aloof Takeko admired by the world would, in private, reveal such innocent and adorable behavior. This unexpected discovery made Narahira want to tease her even more. From outward appearance, Takeko, born of noble blood, whether through her splendid attire or her naturally graceful face, was enough to make any man's heart flutter. Even Narahira, famed for his womanizing ways, was deeply drawn to her presence. But then, Narahira boldly declared that although Takeko was indeed beautiful, her beauty was only enhanced by the lavish clothes and fine makeup she wore. Those words struck Takeko's proud heart like a sharp blade. Never before had she been insulted so directly. In anger, she threw herself at Narahira, knocking him to the ground. She began defending herself, trying to argue, but the more she argued, the more Narahira found her charming. For the first time in his life, the notorious playboy felt what it was like to fall in love, and gradually, Takeko too found herself drawn to this man. The two promised to meet again. As time quietly passed, Takeko and Narahira secretly met countless times. Yet, at each parting, Takeko would always say, "I'm just playing with you." Every time he heard those words, Narahira only found her even more endearing, because he already knew her true feelings. And so, Narahira wished she would no longer say such false things, words that could tarnish her reputation. But Takeko, deeply aware of her fate, knew that one day she would have to become one of the emperor's consorts. It was then that Narahira suddenly proposed they elope. And so, Narahira whisked Takeko away in secret, but her heavy court garments slowed them down. Narahira urged her to remove her outer robes so they could move faster. Takeko, however, refused. She would rather walk on her own 2 feet than shed her clothes, because from the very beginning, Narahira had said that her beauty was only elevated by her luxurious attire. The dew at night, the mushrooms on the trees, these were sights Takeko had never witnessed before. But soon, her brother caught up with them. At that moment, Narahira suddenly realized something. He confessed his love to Takeko. From his words, Takeko sensed something different. She understood that he was offering her his final farewell. She clutched at him, begging him to run, but Narahira remained calm. He told her to return, because he knew, if Takeko truly fled with him, the noble, elegant Takeko he loved would cease to exist. He didn't want her to live a life of exile and hardship. Rather than that, he chose instead to silently remain by her side in spirit. Later, Takeko became an empress consort, and Narahira continued, in his own way, to express his love and longing for her. He wrote poems on folding screens, subtly conveying his yearning for Takeko. Takeko too understood. Their time together had already passed. Instead of clinging to the past, it was better to hold those memories dearly in her heart. In the years to come, only remembrance remained, and that was the truest resting place for their love. Yasuko was offered by her father as a tool for political alliance. She was given to Sadakura, the deposed ruler of the previous dynasty, in exchange for peace between their two families. But Sadakura felt no gratitude. He even mocked her, saying, "Isn't it miserable to be forced to marry a man you despise?" Sadakura expected to provoke Yasuko's anger, but to his surprise, Yasuko didn't get upset. Instead, She began reminiscing about the days of their childhood. It turned out that Sadakura never knew. This marriage was something Yasuko herself had requested. It wasn't the forced arrangement he imagined. In truth, Yasuko had liked him since they were children. Sadakura was Takeko's son. At only 9 years old, he inherited the throne. His first meeting with Yasuko took place in the imperial palace. That day, Sadakura accidentally kicked a ball into his sister's room. He only realized the trouble he'd caused when he heard her crying. The ball had broken his sister's doll. Fortunately, Yasuko quickly fixed the doll and soothed the princess's tears. Just as Sadakura was about to sneak his ball back, Yasuko also reached for it. That was the first time he ever saw Yasuko smile. From that moment, something stirred in his heart, but his stubborn pride wouldn't let him admit it. He even told Narahira that Yasuko was ugly. Yet from then on, Sadakura would always visit his mother whenever Yasuko was around. What's more, every time Sadakura embarrassed himself, Yasuko just happened to be there to witness it. This only made him more frustrated. So whenever Yasuko passed by, he would hide like a child, plotting how to restore his pride and scare the girl who always smiled at him, until one night, kept awake by the croaking of frogs outside, Sadakura stepped out of his room, only to find Yasuko there as well. Yasuko immediately bowed to the young emperor, explaining that she was keeping the princess company. Sadakura was mischievous by nature. Every word out of his mouth sounded like teasing. He wanted to pretend to be a monster and scare her, but Yasuko wasn't frightened at all. She said the noisy frogs actually sounded beautiful. To hear them better, she even walked closer to where the frogs were, but to Sadakura, their croaking was unbearable, keeping him awake all night. Yasuko, however, explained that frogs live such short lives, and that was why they sang with all their might. Sadakura quietly listened to her words. The next day, he asked Narahira how to drive away frogs. Narahira couldn't understand why Sadakura cared so much, but simply told him that snakes could scare them off. That night, Sadakura showed up with a snake that had just eaten a frog. He thought that by doing so, he could prove his courage, but instead, his actions disgusted Yasuko. Angry, Sadakura hurled the snake toward her. After that day, he never saw Yasuko again. Not long after, Sadakura was replaced by his uncle and forced to abdicate. For the sake of their family's interests, Sadakura was compelled to marry Yasuko as a way to balance the emperor's power. Yet Sadakura never forgot how Yasuko had despised him as a child. He thought, rather than trapping her by his side, he should give her freedom. In truth, Sadakura didn't want Yasuko to leave, but as a deposed ruler, he believed no one would willingly stay with him. He told Yasuko that in their marriage, he would give her complete freedom. She could take a lover, she could fall in love with someone else. As long as she was happy, it was enough. But Yasuko didn't agree. She believed that once two people became husband and wife, both had the responsibility to protect the marriage. If they used the excuse of a forced union to justify betrayal, that was nothing more than running away from reality. She admitted that from the first day of marriage, she had been trying to love Sadakura, no matter how harsh his words. She had no intention of leaving him, nor would she ever betray him. Sadakura never imagined that he would one day be treated with such sincerity. He recalled a poem that Narahira once taught him. If you truly love someone, don't be stingy with your praise. Express your feelings honestly, and perhaps the outcome will be different. At last, he wrote Yasuko the first poem of his life. Gone were the insults and cruel words. What remained was sincerity and candor. When Sadakura returned home, Yasuko kissed him without restraint. From the sleepless night filled with frog songs to the moment he wrote his poem, Sadakura finally let go of his pride, and Yasuko remained true to her heart. A story that began as a political marriage found its way back to genuine love. In the end, through honesty and trust, they reached the warmest ending of all. Munsada and Yoshiko had grown up as childhood companions. Though not related by blood, they were raised together as if they were siblings. Munsada kept his love for Yoshiko hidden deep in his heart. He thought their lives would continue this way forever, until adulthood, when Munsada rose to the rank of high official. One day, he overheard his colleagues gambling over Yoshiko's marriage. The rumor was that Yoshiko had set a challenge: 100 consecutive nights of visits, to test the sincerity of her suitors. At first, men came to try, but soon, one by one, they gave up after only a few days. So a betting pool was started, wagering on who might one day win Yoshiko's hand. His colleagues encouraged Munsada to try, but before he could answer, Another colleague suddenly revealed shocking news. The emperor intended to take Yoshiko as his consort, and the time was set. During the 5 ceremonial dances of the nine-name festival, Miyunsada was stunned. That very night, he decided to visit Yoshiko's estate. Yoshiko herself was surprised to see him. After all, since growing up, they had rarely met. Before she could even say a word, Miyunsada brought up her 100 Nights challenge. He argued that it made people think Yoshiko was arrogant, but Yoshiko didn't care. She carried the perspective of a woman far ahead of her time. She had strong opinions about marriage and about a woman's right to pursue happiness. She believed that when entrusting her life to someone, it was only right to test his heart, and she refused to become the kind of wife who spent every night waiting for her husband to come home. Hearing this, Miyunsada began to understand her reasoning. To show his love, he vowed to take on the challenge himself. Yoshiko was surprised by his determination, but Miyunsada declared with confidence that he would succeed. On only the second night, a storm of heavy rain struck, but nothing could shake Miyunsada's resolve. He arrived at Yoshiko's home, drenched. Yoshiko welcomed him warmly despite the weather. She asked him a question: if they married, would she be allowed into the imperial court? For beyond her beauty, Yoshiko possessed extraordinary talent in poetry. She longed to prove her worth in the palace, to shine in contests of poetry and beauty. She feared that if she settled into the role of dutiful wife, her gifts would be buried, never to be used. But Miyunsada grew anxious. He worried that in the palace, other men would covet her. He didn't want Yoshiko to be the center of attention. He only wanted her to be his wife, his alone. But Yoshiko refused to be confined to the small world of a household cage, and so their first conversation ended in discord. But Miyunsada felt that there was still plenty of time, and he planned to use the remaining 98 days to persuade Yoshiko. He wanted Yoshiko to give up what he saw as a naive and dangerous dream. If possible, he wished to guard her within a world meant only for the two of them. But as the days passed, instead of persuading her, he only made her resolve stronger. Once again, they quarreled over the palace. Miyunsada brought up Yoshiko's childhood dream. He knew she had always longed to enter the imperial court, but he also knew that for women, the path was harsh and unforgiving. He couldn't bear to see her walk a thorn-filled road. But Yoshiko refused to become a man's shadow. She would not let all her learning go to waste. She would not, with time, become a woman who gave up her pride just to tend to a husband. Miyunsada could not agree. To him, happiness meant nothing more than two lovers living together in sincerity. He believed he alone could give Yoshiko happiness. But Yoshiko rejected that notion. She wanted to carve out her own life with her talents. She refused to live as a woman hidden behind a man. Miyunsada, after hearing Yoshiko's words, had also considered helping her enter the imperial court. But during a visit to the palace, he noticed how female attendants secretly met with officials. He realized the court was not the paradise Yoshiko imagined, so he gave up on supporting her dream. Then came the final night. Rain poured in torrents. It was the 100th night of his challenge. Though he knew he could not sway her, he wanted one last chance. But as he crossed a bridge, it suddenly collapsed. Elsewhere, Yoshiko heard the news. Miyunsada had fallen into the river and was missing. Panic overtook her. Ignoring her servant's protests, she rushed out to find him. The moment she stepped outside, she saw Miyunsada arrive, drenched but alive. He had escaped from his carriage as it plunged into the water. With that, Miyunsada had passed her test. He had endured the 100 nights. He wanted her to agree to marry him, but Yoshiko still refused. The truth was, Yoshiko had always liked him, and throughout those 100 days, she had even wavered in her resolve. Though she loved Miyunsada deeply, she could not abandon her ideals. Her answer left Miyunsada frustrated. He wanted to try one last time, but when he saw her tears, he let go. In the end, Yoshiko appeared at the nine-name festival. She was chosen by the emperor and entered the palace as his consort. Between dreams and reality, Miyunsada and Yoshiko ultimately walked separate paths.